All right, let's jump into it.
Yeah, so tell us, you're in the Raleigh-Durham area. So where do you actually live? Are you in Raleigh?
And what
Yes.
brought you to Raleigh?
So I live in Raleigh. I actually am just kind of out of the blue. I am visiting a close friend of mine in DC this weekend. So I'm actually in the Compass Logan Circle office at the moment. Kind of came by to say hello. So that's been fun. But yes, so I live in Raleigh. So Raleigh-Durham is kind of like it's its own little. No one really, if you live in Raleigh and you live in Durham, you pick one or the other. The only reason why I guess we really call it Raleigh-Durham, the airport is really kind of the main reason. But yes, especially if you're from Durham or live in Durham, no one likes to be second place. So everyone is just like, no, this is not Raleigh-Durham. You either live in Raleigh or you live in Durham. But yeah, so I live in Raleigh. I'm about 15 minutes from downtown, about 10 minutes from an area called North Hills, which is kind of like our midtown where we see your worky play stuff go on. So it's been really fun and exciting to kind of watch Raleigh grow over the last handful of years. It's definitely changing, but change is always good.
How long have you been in Raleigh?
So I've been in the area since 2014.
Okay.
Yep.
And before, where did you come from?
So grew up in upstate New York, Rochester. Not a lot going on. The real upstate. Any friends that live in the city, love you guys. But the real upstate of New York, Rochester area. But then I went to college in South Florida. I was watching your guys' other live video you guys did, and you guys are talking about Lynn University. I went to a smaller school right down in Fort Lauderdale, Nova Southeastern. It was also not far from me.
Our high school graduation was at Nova South.
Yeah, there's a lot of, it has like a big amphitheater and gymnasium that a lot of people use for events for that. But yeah, so spent a lot of time there and didn't know what I wanted to do at that point, but knew I wanted to change. And my dad's a developer, and my sister is a general contractor, and they all have been in real estate for a very long time, for generations. And my family was like, hey, we're going to move to North Carolina. And my sister went to undergrad in the Carolinas and always wanted to come back. So I really didn't know what I was going to do. So I was like, you know what, take me with you.
Yeah.
So I went to North Carolina, hoped for the best. And yeah, I mean, I don't think I would have thought I would land here, but I wouldn't want it any other way. I love the Triangle. It's a great area. We've seen a lot of growth and a lot of millennials that are moving or staying. Definitely not the conversation that was happening, back when I first moved here, kind of all of that, the Duke University, UNC, Chapel Hill, which is like its own battle. You have to pick one or the other. Personally, I like the color of a Carolina blue better than a navy blue. Not the reason to pick a sports fan, but
good enough reason for us. The only reason we have to be Duke is I have family who went to Duke, so we have to be on the
exactly.
Duke side.
Either if you can't, you got to toe the line. Can't switch it up. But yeah, so just like the intellectual, talent that didn't always stay from when they would graduate, get their PhDs, they would kind of, entertain bigger markets in California and New York and Texas. And, since Apple announced a handful of years ago that they're going to be building their East Coast campus here in the Triangle, which I guess not a lot of people know about. It didn't make a lot of mainstream media, I guess. But they are building an East Coast campus.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so it's like a huge development that's going in. A lot of that talent is, with corporations like that coming in, they're starting to, whether they're doing startups or they're planting roots here, which is really cool to see. Like I said, the talent didn't always stay after they would get their degrees in education locally, but now you're starting to see that grow, which is that say that again?
How's that impacting pricing?
It is impacting pricing. So, the demand is there. During the COVID shuffle, of course, people were moving to our market, and we were kind of definitely overdue for a price correction, if that's what you want to call it, for some time. There was definitely very affordability in our area, and technically on paper still is compared to other bigger markets. But definitely like the conversations, I'm having with buyers is we're not going backwards. This was, I know that the volatility of, will the market crash and all those questions that keep coming up. Our area, we're still seeing steady growth, obviously not what we were seeing when rates were 3%, but the demand is still there, and the pockets that, are buying that are coming from those other markets are just deeper. So with interest rates and stuff, we haven't seen a huge slowdown. Things have definitely changed, but we're not like in a place where, we're concerned or scared, just because, people that are moving here from other markets, sometimes what they can get for $600,000, $700,000 is they're in love with it and what they can purchase for that price, that the interest rate really isn't bothering them that much.
Yeah. And, I think it's interesting from the investment side too, right? As there are people who maybe are, we get calls all the time. I'm looking to invest. Where do I put my money? And sometimes they think there might be opportunity in our borough in the Bronx because it's the lower price borough of the city. But even up here, it can be a hard place to do investment, especially price point wise. So I'm wondering if you're seeing investors in other markets really seeing the opportunity there, or is it more going towards the primary resident putting down the roots? Who's got the opportunity right now?
Yeah, so investing in our market is definitely, in my opinion, I think it's pretty interesting. Just because, people do compare us to smaller markets like, or not large cities, I should say, Austin, Nashville, markets of that nature. In my opinion, we're not that those are crazy Airbnb markets, but, the Bachelorette, the Bachelor destination type cities, that's more of the tourism. We don't have a ton of that. We are growing in that sector, but we're more of that intellectual, like what I tell investor clients, the Airbnb that's like the cream of the crop in our market is like the travel nurse, not the, trying to find a spot close to town for your, weekend bachelorette party. So I think the intellectual portion of the investment, like for an investor that what's moving here, they might not want to rent long term, but they're moving their family across the country for a job, and that they're, so like that market is still there. A lot of buyers, want to be having their feet on the ground here locally before they're buying a house. So the investor sector there is definitely still strong. I would say right now, cash is obviously something that's very attractive. So those investors that do have the ability to purchase with cash is appealing. So, the investor sector, because of what's coming and the developments and jobs that are coming to our area and the salaries that are coming with those jobs, the investor, market is still holding strong.
What's the housing stock like in Raleigh? Like, is there new development? Or are there a lot of old houses? Like, what do you get in Raleigh?
Yeah, so at least like the one thing I do love about the Triangle in general. So when I say Triangle, Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, and suburbs, including of Cary and areas of that. Each market kind of has their own little feel, which is kind of, nice. Buyers come from out of state and they kind of can drive through and get a feel for like each area and how it's a little different. But yeah, so like Raleigh itself, it's got charm, it's got your bigger, older homes, definitely in the core, which we call inside the Beltline, which is, inside a highway. Outside of that, you're more split levels built in the 70s and 80s and, bigger lots and things of that nature. We're having some of those being torn down for, $5 million houses that are all painted white. They're gorgeous, but they're all painted white. So like it kind of, there's a lot of different architecture and a lot of different vibes. The older, like charminess is definitely like very hard to come by, especially in low inventory markets. It's just not as, the area itself we're definitely more of a spread out type of a market, more than we are like an urban, they compare us to Austin, and Austin's more of like that, urban density, whereas Raleigh, we're kind of focused more on like growing outward than necessarily up. So with that, like you just get more of your, what might feel like suburbia.
Is that us?
We've lost your audio here suddenly.
Yeah, we suddenly can't hear you. Oh, yeah, we can hear
You're
you
back
now.
now. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Perfect. I had a call that was coming in. Yeah, so it was just different architecture across the board. But, you know, when I first moved here, I was kind of like, oh, it doesn't have the charm of like Savannah and Charleston. Like those areas definitely have the core of what, you know, we call Southern charm. But Raleigh for sure has its fair share of, you know, cool architecture and classic homes.
I want to talk very briefly about what a home buyer in Raleigh needs to be aware of that makes your market unique. You know, one example I like to give is like, hey, in New York, you need an attorney to do your closing. We are an attorney state. We do not write contracts. So what are some of the interesting things that somebody should know about the process in your market?
Well, there's one that comes to mind right away, and I'm sure any other agent in North Carolina, across the state in general, would say the same thing. We are, to my knowledge, I've worked with many Compass referrals from other states, and I have not come across one agent who is not like flabbergasted or thinks I'm lying to them. We have a non-refundable deposit that's due at contract formation, and essentially what that means is once your offer is accepted, that fee is due to the seller. It's not to the escrow agent or the closing attorney. It's due directly to the seller, you know, immediately. Those funds are credited towards the purchase of the home at closing. But the caveat is if you decide to terminate at any moment, you don't get that money back.
But
It doesn't, unless there's like a very obvious seller breach or, you know, something in that regard. But say like, you know, we go through inspections and you decide, hey, like, the inspection report's a little too much to digest, I want to terminate, we can go ahead and do that, but you're going to lose your deposit. And that deposit is not a standard like fee as far as a percentage or a flat rate. So when things with low inventory and competition, you know, we were seeing 6 figures of that non-refundable deposit. So it's, you know, yeah, it was intense. We went to the, you know, several agents would complain to the commission, and they told us that was like price fixing, so they couldn't put a cap on it. So it's just been a fun. That's definitely the biggest thing to prepare for. Not that it would be 6 figures. You know, we can, you know, when things were slower, we were seeing between that 1% to 3%, and then, you know, definitely goes over that when we're competing. But it's money that the buyer has to be comfortable with. You
Like
know,
the risk to take on as a buyer.
yeah, how do you
Yeah.
mitigate that risk before, like?
Yeah,
How do
you
you
know,
mitigate that?
for us, when we're working with buyers, they're not, you know, the point of no return for them is contract signing, right? So we do our best to, instead of putting into a contract a contingency for an inspection, we do the inspection before you sign, so we know what we're signing for. An accepted offer is really more like an agreement with, and you're starting to move forward towards a contract. But there's, you know, either party can walk away at any time. So yeah, how do you mitigate that for your clients?
So honestly, my background and, you know, when I'm interviewing to take on buyers, you know, just my background in real estate and being in design prior to being into real estate, you know, knowing the science, you know, is what I call it, the science behind a house. And, you know, I'm not a licensed home inspector, you know, but I do, you know, I've been on many construction sites. I've seen a lot of things where, you know, just because something might be priced at something and could sell for that amount doesn't mean that the value of the product or the quality is there. You know, there's going to be some things that you'll definitely come across. And so I tell them, like, you know, I get into the crawl space. We're famous for having crawl spaces or foundations here. We don't have a ton of basements, but so I'll, you know, get into crawl spaces with a flashlight during a showing. You know, I warn them when I'm interviewing them, I'm like, I'm going to sound like a Debbie Downer when we walk through houses, but like, I'm happy for you. I'm loving this journey. Just know, like, I want you to know when you cut that, like, there's no buyer remorse once we find out our offer's accepted and you need to cut a check for 30 grand. Like, I just need you to be excited to cut that check. Although it's like a lot of money, like, I need you to be happy, not like worried that, you know, you're going to want to terminate. So how I
Because you kind of have to do the inspection beforehand. Like, you have to do the inspection.
Inspection.
Yeah, so like sometimes with like sellers, I do, you know, try to recommend like, hey, can we do a pre-listing inspection